Hello everyone again, and welcome to Jason's in the House. I'm your host, Jason Parisella, real estate agent over at Keller Williams Realty at the Cumming Center. Nice to be with you again, and as you all know, March was quite a month with rain. So tonight we're going to talk about rain, water, and how it affects people's homes and what we've been going through for the last couple months here. So we've had the folks from Servpro on before. We're having them back for a second time to specifically talk about water and basements and homes. So again, we have Marc, LeBlanc, and Larry Green from Servpro, and they're actually the owners of Servpro of Burlington, Woburn, and Servpro of Stoneham and Wakefield. So they're actually located in Woburn. So welcome, Marc and Larry. It's a pleasure to have you on the show again.
It's great to be back.
Good. So as we normally do on all our shows, why don't you talk a little bit about the company, and then we can get right into the some of the issues people, I'm sure, have questions on with water.
Okay, well, Servpro is a cleaning and restoration company with the emphasis on restoration and disaster recovery. We try to help homeowners, business owners out with such natural disasters as we've experienced in the last month or so, from flooding, heavy rains, from fires, from mold, which is resulting from a lot of these rains we just had. We're already starting to see it. But we also offer a number of more routine types of services, including carpet cleaning, air duct cleaning, upholstery cleaning, deodorization of homes. And so those are among our services. We are a franchise operation, and we've been in business as a franchise since 1967, and there are about 1,400 Servpros nationwide, and we cover our particular franchise services the entire Essex and Middlesex County areas.
Excellent.
And that in a nutshell is who we are.
Great. I'm sure, I mean, me included, myself, I got water in my basement. So I'm sure many people that are watching had water last, month or so. So let's first talk about what homeowners should do in a terrible flood situation like we've had. What's some of the things that people need to be aware of? And
one of the lessons we learned early on in the first storm was to wait for the water to stop raining. The reason for that is we would go out and pump out homes, and the water would be coming in just as quickly as we were pumping it out. So the hard thing there, I know you want to get the water out as quick as you can, but you're better off waiting for it to stop raining. That way you only have to incur the expense of pumping it out once more than multiple times.
so what happens in that situation, which we've had in March, where you have that issue that the water's coming in and you're pumping out and it's coming back in, or the sewer line's backing up, or things like that? You say to wait. Meanwhile, your basement's, how do you?
It's easier said than done.
Right.
I understand you're looking at your furnace, you're looking at your water heater and your other high-end appliances down there, and you're thinking, these things are going to be ruined. But as we've got some high-powered pumps that'll take out 15 to 20,000 gallons an hour.
Wow.
And if we're not making a dent in that water, it's really, unfortunately, a little too premature to start pumping it out.
So you guys do supply the sump pumps too? So you actually put the pumps in?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
And another thing that we found also is that in the aftermath of the floods, particularly folks, well, obviously with folks who have finished basements, everybody's trying to save their carpets, and it's very understandable, but the standards that we work by and the standards in our industry dictate that we treat groundwater as contaminated water. And our advice to all the homeowners and business owners that we dealt with is, we hate to tell you this, but these carpets that you have, these rugs, they're contaminated, they're health hazards. Our standards teach us to treat it as if it were sewage. So, we'll do whatever the homeowner asks, but it's advisable to, not only that, but it also serves as a sponge, carpet and pad. So you're going to retain that water for longer. Then you start running the risks of mold and bacterial colonization. So you want to, if you have carpeted basements, rip the carpet out and bite the bullet and move forward from there.
It sounds like when you mention the mold and other items that could be an issue, that it's probably going to be cheaper, or less expensive in the long run to just replace it, or get rid of it, get it out of the house, and then think about
For
replacing
health,
it.
yeah, for safety reasons, for health reasons, by all means, carpet areas should be removed when it has a groundwater situation, overflow from a sump, some dirty water scenario. By all means, it's less expensive to remove it and replace it than it is for us to come in and dry it with our drying equipment and clean it afterwards. We're telling people our recommendation is to remove it. And I wouldn't want to put my family in that room afterwards. It's just something that it's unhealthy.
It's unhealthy. Now, you know, I'm thinking to myself, you put a carpet in your basement. You pretty much, I mean, you need to know that you're not going to get water down there, because that's almost like,
Absolutely.
you know, you even get a little corner and all of a sudden you get any water in the basement, what you're saying is it's contaminated. Now, you know, even if you have a corner of the rug that's contaminated. So you want to obviously preventively not put a rug down, I would imagine, unless you really know it's dry.
Yeah, I mean, we tore out hundreds of rooms full of carpeting, and people are asking us, what do we put back in its place? And we're saying, well, it's happened once, so you're probably not going to want carpeting. We're recommending tile floors, anything that's non-porous that is going to be able to withstand that kind of that type of inundation with water.
Now, what about a pergo type floor, like a wood, what do you call it?
Laminate flooring or pre-finished flooring?
Pre-finished.
They're not recommended for basements. Typically a floating floor or laminate flooring has a vapor barrier between the concrete floor and the hardwood floor. That vapor barrier, if water does get underneath it, we cannot dry it. That is a breeding ground for mold. So whenever a laminate or a pre-finished floor gets wet or substantially wet, we have to remove it.
So you'd think maybe when you do that, you have you raise it up a little bit, but you're saying
you can,
when you raise it, that section could be an issue?
Yes. Yep, because it has a vapor barrier, and the vapor barrier is to keep the moisture from coming up. In normal conditions, it doesn't allow the moisture to come up and penetrate underneath the wood floor. But in a flooding situation, it's all absorbing water. And we can't get underneath that pergo or that laminate floor and dry underneath that without dealing with the hardwood floor on top.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what can homeowners do? I know there's a lot of different things you can do, but kind of general things to minimize damage after what we've gone through with all the rain and the flooding.
In the future, what we've been telling people is we've had houses that people lived in their homes for 30, 40 years who never had water before. This was such a fluke, 3 storms, the water table was so high, we might not ever get water like this again, but you never know.
Right.
What we've been telling people who have finished basements is not to put a carpet back down in the basement. But also, if they did cut out walls to 2 feet or a certain height, we're telling people to leave the sheetrock a few inches above the flooring and get a base molding, and that'll cover up the difference. So from the room, looking at the walls, you're not going to see a gap in the floor. But even if you only got a ½ an inch of water in a room, the sheetrock walls will absorb the water with capillary action, like a straw does in a glass of water.
I see.
The walls do the same thing. So people will call us and say, we only had a ½ an inch of water in our basement. And that ½ inch, they dried it up, they tried to use a wet vac, and they think they got all the water out, but in reality, when we go out there and we use some of our moisture meters or a thermal imaging camera, some of the walls were wet. So people thought they were doing the right things. The big thing is make sure you get the water up as much as you can, as fast as you can. Wet vacs are a good tool, but they're not going to get the water out of a carpeted pad. They're not going to get the water out of inside a wall cavity. Sometimes you're going to have to bite the bullet and have to open up walls. And sometimes you're going to have to rip, forget about the carpet, forget about your flooring, and get it down to bare basics.
So when you put the wood, if you have the wood on your basement floor, the framing of say you have a bathroom in the basement, you're framing it with the wood, and then you're going to keep the sheetrock, whatever, a foot not
A few inches.
a few inches above. How about that wood though that's on contact with the flooring? Is that going to absorb the moisture and hold it, or is it not?
Less likely
less
because
likely?
it's wood. It's hardwood. Typically, the sill plate is made of pressure-treated wood, which is treated with chemicals that is going to resist mold more than the paper on sheetrock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sheetrock's probably, is that one of the worst, or a
It's-
breeding ground for mold?
It's
Is the sheetrock? Out of all the materials, what's the most,
sheetrock's one of the worst.
that will grow the fastest?
Yes, because sheetrock is basically two pieces of paper with gypsum in the middle. The paper on the sheetrock will grow mold in 48 to 72 hours in wet conditions.
Is that quicker than a rug and a pad? Or is it
Yes,
kind of the,
yes, because rugs and pads are typically materials that are not natural materials, they're man-made materials, and they're going to have some resistancy to mold compared to sheetrock. Nowadays they do make sheetrock that is resistant to mold, but depending on the age of your basement or the walls in your basement, it's most likely not the mold-resistant sheetrock.
right. So, I mean, it sounds like finished basements in general are.
They're problem
you're
areas.
starting to- Yeah,
You know, if you know that your home is in a area that takes water, one of the major lessons, and we're hearing a lot of people talking to us about it now, is what do we put in for drainage systems? And
Whole nother thing,
sump
yeah.
pumps, French drains, B-dry systems. Quite honestly, we had people calling us in to do pumping and remediation work who had any or all of the above and still
Really,
couldn't
they
keep
had-
up with the floods. French drains, B-dries, we were surfacing, we were working at a lot of these.
was it because, what was the problem? Was it just too much water, or the pumps failed? Or
The
what was-
volume of the water.
The volume of the
Yeah.
water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the water table was
So
so
it-
high, especially after the second and third incidents of the storms that we had. The water table was so high that B-dry systems either couldn't keep up with them, or it was just overflowed with water.
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing too is when electricity's gone, you don't have electricity and your pumps are electric.
Right. Yeah.
Now you're
that's-
talking about putting in a generator and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
You can
million
really
things
go
you
into-
can do.
yeah.
A lot of it depends upon your wallet, the
Right,
size
I
of your
mean-
wallet. But I mean, there are things. One thing is, if you do have sumps and you hear these reports, these storms were not surprises.
Right.
They were predicting heavy rains. I think people need to pay a little bit more attention and just check them out, make sure that they're functional. Just test them before you go, because a lot of people would call us and say, we have some pumps, but they never turned on, they never shut off. And
Right.
so they may have been sitting there for 5 years without ever having been exercised, and now the time comes when you need them, and
And
they're
they're
not,
not gonna- they're not
functional
working,
anymore.
yeah.
So.
So now the water's there.
Mm-hmm.
So what do people do to get to dry out their basements? Now that the water's penetrated,
Typically, what we've been doing is cutting if the walls are insulated. If they're exterior walls and you have some form of insulation in them.
actually that's another thing too. The insulation, is that
The unfaced insulation typically is okay. The fiberglass unfaced insulation is okay. The faced insulation, that the mold will grow on the paper on the
Paper.
face. Some of the recycled insulation, like the blown-in insulation, that's typically recycled newspaper that's been treated. What'll happen in that scenario, if the water will compress it, so the R value of that insulation will never return to full R value. You'll never get the full value of that insulation. The fiberglass will retain its R value, so that will go back to its normal state, but some of these other ones will not. And we need to open up areas to get that wet insulation out, or it will be a breeding ground for mold.
yeah? Okay.
I mean, some of the other things that people need to do is to get, as soon as possible, try to start getting air movement. As soon as, the water stops rising and you've extracted the water, you want to get the water out
As much as you can, get
possible.
rid of most of it, whatever you
Right.
can.
Then you want to get some air movement going with fans. You want to get dehumidification going, whether it's even a little home dehumidifier or something like we use, which is about 165 pounds and 4 feet high. You still want to pull as much moisture out of the air as possible to prevent things like mold to prevent bacterial growth, and also just to dry down the structure and stop any residual damage to the, to the walls,
Yep.
and the floors,
Right.
whatever else.
We were talking too before the show about, how long does it take for mold to start growing? Because, we're talking about, there's really two issues. The water, obviously the damage it does to now you have to get new carpet in your walls, of, you have to maybe re-insulate. The bigger issue is, the health ramifications of the mold when that starts growing. So when do you have to start worrying about mold?
Basically 48 to 72 hours after the incident occurs, because that's the basic standard mold or the easiest mold to grow. It takes 48 to 72 hours for mold to grow on cellulose materials, the paper on sheetrock, the paper on insulation. If you have items down there, if it's storage room or items down there, the cardboard boxes get wet, the paper files or whatever you have stored down there. Those things are going to be in a wet condition, in a wet environment, will grow mold very quickly. And even though it's happening in your basement, that air travels throughout your home. So if you have mold spores in your basement, there's a chance that those spores are going to travel up through your stairwell into your first floor. And if you have HVAC systems, forced hot air, it's going to get into your ductwork and just breed all kinds of problems.
So how do you prevent the mold colonization?
Well, one thing that's very important that we do after every job that we worked on, whether it required dehumidification or just pumping out of water, removing carpets, is we do spray down the areas where we've worked in with an EPA registered disinfectant that includes a fungicide to inhibit mold growth and bactericide to inhibit bacterial growth. So bleach, by the way, is not considered to be a great antidote to mold because it's about 98-99% water, and that just kind of feeds it.
Oh, I see. It kind of feeds it. Well, it's
Yeah.
It's not recommended on porous materials. On non-porous materials, bleach away.
So like a concrete floor. Well, is that
Concrete floor is porous.
porous? Yeah. What would be a non?
In a basement,
Yeah, the basement is
not a whole lot of things are non-porous in a basement.
right.
If you have a tile floor down there, tile is porous to a certain degree, but you can get away with using bleach on it.
Yeah.
But most things are porous, so bleach is not recommended.
So what would someone use? Can someone pick up something that could be effective?
You could go on the EPA website. They have a list of EPA registered antimicrobials and fungicides, and those type of products are available through the EPA website, or even your local Home Depot or Lowe's or hardware store. They have a good selection of materials that can be purchased that'll take care of the problems.
Now, when you say take care of it, you spray it.
Yes. Typically with
What do
a
you
pump
do after
spray,
that? You spray it and it kills it all, and it just stays there.
in
Or is it
contact with
dormant?
it, it'll kill the materials it comes in contact with. And then in the meantime, we're drying the structure using our equipment, our dehumidifiers and air movers.
So you don't start scrubbing it or anything like that. It's like to clean it.
No.
You just spray it and then you dry it.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. You start scrubbing it. Is that going to
If there is
bring things
mold present, you're going to stir up the spores. This is before the 48 and 72 hours has passed, so we're in pretty good shape. If any time during our remediation process or pumping out, if we do find visible mold that might have been pre-existing, we protect the area and we don't put in air movers to stir up the mold. We take care of the mold first, and then we move on to the other areas to protect ourselves and the residents of the home.
Right.
Yeah, but the disinfecting is primarily preventive. It's not.
So you're spraying the area and then you're drying it at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so those are the two main things. You want to make sure you have something down there that's going to kill any existing or mold that's just coming to fruition, and you're also trying to dry everything down to make the environment less hospitable to mold growth.
Right. Right.
Once the mold is grown, then it becomes a matter of removing the materials that are home to the mold.
So the mold is actually grown, and if you spray it, what are you doing to it? Killing it?
We typically don't
Or do you-
spray directly on mold. It depends on the material it's on. On sheetrock, our guidelines is to cut it out 2 feet beyond visible growth. So there's no way of remediating mold from sheetrock or blue board.
Once it's
or
there,
it's there, we need to cut it out. Once you get down to the framing, the 2x4 studs or sill plates, or floor joists or underside of sheathing, if it's in an attic space, you can spray it. Typically we go in and we HEPA vacuum it first, then we'll spray a fungicide, then we'll HEPA vacuum it again, and then at times in wood materials it has a root, a hyphae. Mold grows into the wood, not deep into the wood, but into the surface. We will come back and either sand it, dry ice blast it, soda blast it, or even sandblasting is one of the recommended ways of remediating it.
That way you're taking care, you're taking not only the surface, but you're getting down to the root level so that it doesn't, return.
return, right?
There we go.
Yeah. Now, what about, are these flood losses covered by homeowners insurance?
The
How
standard
has that been working? I mean, is it?
You really have to talk to your agent. The standard homeowners policy does not cover flood. There are endorsements that you can buy that would give you a sump pump endorsement might give you limited coverage, 1,000, 2,500, 5,000, an endorsement that's attached to your policy. If you have a sump pump. If it was just groundwater or surface water, typically your homeowner's policy will not cover that.
Now, so if you have a pipe breaks and you have a leak from a pipe, is that covered?
That's typically a covered loss. That's considered a
But-
sudden and fortuitous event. It's a pipe inside your home. It's a covered cause of loss. But groundwater or surface water is coming from the outside.
So most people are not covered.
No.
No, I would
Yeah,
say
they're not covering any of this stuff.
maybe 3% of the people that we responded to over the last month had coverage that, a lot of people thought they had coverage,
Yeah.
but they were denied. There was, I think, we had 2 instances of people who actually purchased flood insurance, which is quite costly. And one of those has had some conversations with me telling me that there's all sorts of reasons that they're
denying
being
it.
denied.
Well, I mean, being in the real estate business, there's certain homes, whatever the flood maps, and then
Sure.
the banks, they require you to get flood insurance. So even in those situations, those people potentially may not be covered under certain circumstances?
Under
Yes.
certain circumstances.
There are some flood policies, even though you're in a floodplain, but they'll only cover from the first floor up. They won't cover a basement in a flood
That's
policy.
interesting. First,
It's, because you're in a floodplain,
Wow.
your bank
So
might
you-
require you to have flood insurance.
right.
But read it,
It says first floor.
Yeah.
Interesting. So now we've talked about it's not covered. So now what is this all going to cost? We call Servpro and you come in and do an average, kind of an average job, and the homeowner gets the bill?
Probably a little less than you might think. Because we've been moving so quickly and the demand has been so great, normal estimating, protocols had to go out the window for us because they're very detail-oriented. You have to do a lot of measurement. You have to do, and it's usually task-based pricing that we deal with insurance companies. But because of the situation, we've been doing it based upon hourly labor and kind of rolling everything into that. I would say our average job was maybe somewhere between $700 and $1,200, somewhere in that range. There were some homes that just got hammered.
Yeah.
And, so there are some jobs out there that were $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. But there were other jobs where we went in, washed out, cleaned up the debris, and folks, it was $200, $250, things like that. So wide range.
Kind of a wide range
Yeah.
of what obviously has
Yeah.
to happen, things like that. Excuse the cell phone, I'm sorry about that. So, what lessons have you learned? What do we do now? It happens, next time it happens, which it probably will at some point. This was very, very rare. However, I think generally people do get waters in their, basements are prone to have water in them.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it makes for a very chaotic situation when you have this because, number one, most people don't really have a plan in place.
Right.
Which is why we're talking about checking your sumps. If you have the ability to put in a more advanced drainage system, do so. Some of the things that we learned as a restoration company, number one, I think that it's communities should have disaster recovery plans and try to coordinate, understand what the resources are to help out in a particular community, whether it's private companies like our own or the DPW or, how to coordinate some of the response in cases like that. I think that one of the main lessons we learned is to have a plan and stick to it. The first couple of days, we were more or less running around like a chicken with our heads cut off. We were trying to get to everybody.
Right.
And we found that you can't really do that. And I think another thing is that people, including ourselves, shouldn't bite off more than they can chew. I know a lot of people want to, are do-it-yourselfers, let's do it ourselves, but that could lead to more problematic and more expensive issues downstream. On our own way of doing business, you can't overbook because then you're keeping people, you're not really servicing anybody as well as you should be.
Right.
So after the first couple of days, I think we realized that, and we started to farm some of the work out when we reached capacity and handled what we felt we could adequately and with some quality to the workmanship. So
Good. Well, just to wrap things up, if people have further questions for you, I'm sure some people will be kind of thinking some other things we haven't
Sure.
talked about. How can they get a hold of you guys and your company?
you can give us a call. Our phone number is 781-939-6990, or you can email us. You can send it to my own email, which is lgreen, no E at the end, at servpro9427.com. There's a website that they can go to that tells about the franchise operations and some of the services that we offer, and that's just very simple, www.servpro.com.
Great. Well, thanks again, guys, for coming on, and very informative.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having us once again.
Good. Well, in closing, I want to thank you all again for joining us. It's always good to be here. And if you have any questions for me at all at any point, you can visit my website, which is jasonparisellateam.com. Thank you, BevCam, for having us, and we will see you next time. Thank you.